How did we get connected with the G12 Vision? We've been growing as a church, and through a number of reasons, we've gotten involved in cell ministry. And so I had a good friend who I trusted a lot, who knew a lot about cell groups and small groups, whatever term we use for them. And so I kept going to him, asking him for tips, asking him, okay, how do we do this? How do we do that? And he kept talking to me about this G12 Vision thing. And I was like, oh man, I don't know. He's like, yeah, you gotta check this thing out. It's absolutely amazing. It's this church in Bogota, and just all these things that God is doing. And I'm not a bandwagon guy. So I was like, I don't know about this, but I just kept hearing about it and kept hearing about it. So finally I was like, you know what? I need to figure out what this thing is and either decide if we're gonna do it, or at least I can just forget about it. And so at a conference at Toronto Airport Christian Fellowship that was on the G12 Vision, I took my father along with me. I said, Dad, come with me, we gotta check this thing out. So there's this man from England named Ken Gott who was talking about these things called encounter weekends and just talking about how they change people's lives. And it just hit us. And I remember we just felt so strong, God say to us, this is the future. So I went to my friend and said, okay, we want to do this, what do we do? And he said, well, you got to come with us to Bogota. We're going for their yearly convention in January. Why don't you come with us? And so I went along with him, and I remember it was just a powerful, life-changing week for me. We were in the Coliseum in downtown Bogota, Colombia. The church would rent this Coliseum every weekend, and they fill it 4 times, like 20,000 people, and they still didn't have enough room for their entire church. That's how many people they had. But we were in there, and I remember there's so many things that happened that week, but the one thing that will always stick with me was I was there on the Saturday night for the youth service. And we were there and we were in worship, and I was at the front worshiping. And at one point, they just began to jump. And the entire stadium, like literally 20,000 young people were just jumping. I remember I was videotaping for everyone back home, so I'm spinning my camera around the entire Coliseum. And I remember just looking. I remember just the Spirit of God coming on me. And I remember I just fell to my knees, and I was just crying. And I said, God, whatever it takes to see something like this in Toronto, I want to be part of it. I want to see it happen. And so I really believe from that point on, I knew that this is what we're supposed to be doing. And I remember very quickly after that, in that same night, I was kind of like, wait a minute, what am I doing? How are we going to do this? So many questions, so many things I didn't understand. And I felt like God said to me, he said, put your hand up. So I put my hand up. He said, take my hand. He said, that's how you're going to do this. You're going to do it by walking with me. And we just began to do it. We began to work on having teams of 12 and encounter weekends and school of leaders and these different components of the vision. And for about the first year and a half, it went amazing. We more than doubled as a church. We were seeing great things happen, and I just figured the sky's the limit. We're going to take off. But then over time, and it really was the Lord, because there was a lot of character things. There was still a lot of growing that we had to do. We kind of leveled off. And part of it was there was still a lot we didn't understand. But we were very frustrated and kept getting off track because we didn't have mentorship or help. And so we really reached a point where I became very, almost disillusioned and started to become a little frustrated. But it was in that season that God was so good to us, because he connected us with Bishop Flynn and Carolyn Johnson, who just are our pastors and just absolutely means so much to us. I remember the first time I ever saw them, we went down, they had the G12 Canada conference in downtown Toronto. And I remember we were there, and there's a number of speakers, but there was this preacher from Atlanta named Bishop Flynn Johnson. I remember he had his suits, he had his bow tie, like he was definitely not Toronto, but he was absolutely amazing. Like he's just preaching words. I remember there was one message, he was on the ground.
That is your problem.
Ese es su problema.
You just won't die.
Usted no se puede morir.
You ought to learn a lesson.
Usted tiene que aprender la lección.
When God speaks to you
Cuando Dios le hable
and wants to get rid of what you
y
had,
quiere quitarle lo que tiene,
just go ahead and die, man.
muérase.
Woo! Woo!
Talking about, you're fighting it and everything else, and the poor translator kept trying to keep up with them, and the crowd just absolutely loved him. And his wife was wonderful too. She got up and shared messages before that. And I remember that, so just all our guys, we had about 50 or 60 members. And I remember after his session, several came up to me and said, we need to get this guy at Church Without Limits. And I remember thinking in my mind, listen, he just spoke to like 4,000 people. You don't get guys like that in churches like ours. It just doesn't work that way. And, me of great faith, right? And so anyways, we kind of moved forward, but it was interesting how God started to work. Well, 6 months later, I was at a meeting in Dallas. He was also there with a couple of his guys. So I just introduced myself, said, hey, saw you in Toronto. It's nice to meet you. That was pretty much it. A couple months later, we were back in Bogota, Colombia, ended up in the same hotel as him. He came down, recognized me from the conference a couple months earlier, talked. We spent about half an hour just talking and connecting, and it was great. And then I found out he was coming to Toronto with another church. And so I called that church and said, hey, do you think we could pay for some extra nights and get them to come early? And they said, sure. And so later that year, we had Bishop Flynn and Carolyn Johnson come in for the first time to Church Without Limits. They're such a blessing. They're so wonderful. And we are so thankful the Lord has brought them into our lives.
They're an amazing couple. They've been great pastors. We wouldn't be where we are in ministry if it weren't for them, and we're just so grateful for having them mentor us through the years and really impart into us as well as our church.
It was an absolute divine connection for us, an absolute divine connection for our church.